Page 25. The Secret of Life. One day, I had a visitor. I was in the TV room watching Lisa watch TV when a nurse came in to tell me. "You've got a visitor," she said. "Amen." It wasn't my troublesome boyfriend. First of all, he wasn't my boyfriend anymore. How could a person who was locked up have a boyfriend? However, he couldn't bear coming here. His mother had been in Loody Bin too, it turned out, and he couldn't bear being reminded of it. It wasn't my father. He was busy. It wasn't my high school English teacher. He'd been fired and moved to North Carolina. I went to see who it was. He was standing at the window in the living room, looking out, giraffe tall and with slumpy academic shoulders, wrists sticking out of his jacket, and pale hair that shot out from his head in a corona. He turned around when he heard me come in. It was Jim Watson. I was happy to see him, because in the 50s, he had discovered the secret of life, and now perhaps he would tell it to me. "Jim," I said. He drifted towards me. He drifted and wobbled and faded out while he was supposed to be talking to people, and I'd always liked him for that. "You look fine," he told me. "What did you expect?" I asked. He shook his head. "What do they do to you in here?" he was whispering. "Nothing," I said. They don't do anything." "It's terrible here," he said. The living room was a particularly terrible part of our ward. It was huge and jammed with huge vinyl-covered armchairs that farted when anyone sat down. "It's really not that bad," I said, but I was used to it, and he wasn't. He drifted towards the window again and looked out. After a while, he beckoned me over with one of his long arms. "Look," he pointed at something. "At what?" "That." He was pointing at a car. It was a red sports car. "Maybe an MG. "That's mine," he said. He'd won the Nobel Prize, so probably he bought this car with the money. "Nice," I said. "Very nice." Now he was whispering again. "We could leave," he whispered. "Huh?" "You and me. We could leave." "In that car, you mean?" I felt confused. Was this the secret of life? Running away was the secret of life? "They'd come after me," I said. "It's fast," he said. "I could get you out of here." Suddenly I felt protective of him. "Thanks," I said. "Thanks for offering. It's sweet of you." "Don't you want to go?" He leaned towards me. "We could go to England." "England? What did England have to do with anything?" "I can't go to England," I said. "You could be a governess," he said. For 10 seconds, I imagined this other life, which began when I stepped into Jim Watson's red car and we sped out of the hospital onto the airport. The governess part was hazy. The whole thing, in fact, was hazy. The vinyl chairs, the security screens, the buzzing of the nursing station door, those things were clear. "I'm here now, Jim," I said. "I think I've got to stay here." "Okay." He didn't seem miffed. He looked around the room one last time and shook his head. I stayed at the window. After a few minutes, I saw him get into his red car and drive off, leaving little puffs of sporty exhaust behind him. Then he went back to the TV room. "Hi, Lisa," I said. I was glad to see she was still there. Said Lisa. Then we settled in for some TV. Politics. In our parallel world, things happened that had not yet happened in the world we'd come from. When they finally happened outside, we found them familiar because versions of them had been performed in front of us. It was as if we were a provincial audience, New Haven to the real world's New York, where history could try out its next spectacle. For instance, the story of Georgina's boyfriend, Wade, and the sugar. They had met in the cafeteria. Wade was dark and good-looking in a flat, all-American way. What made him irresistible was his rage. He was enraged about almost everything and glowed with anger. Georgina explained that his father was the problem. His father is a spy, and Wade's mad that he can never be as tough as his father. I was more interested in Wade's father than in Wade's problem. "A spy for us?" I asked. "Of course," said Georgina, but she wouldn't say more. Wade and Georgina would sit on the floor of our room and whisper. I was supposed to leave them alone, and usually I did. One day, though, I decided to stick around and find out about Wade's father. Wade loved talking about him. He lives in Miami, so he can get over to Cuba. He invaded Cuba. He's killed dozens of people with his bare hands. He knows who killed the president. "Did he kill the president?" I asked. "I don't think so," said Wade. Wade's last name was Barker. I have to admit, I didn't believe a word of what Wade said. After all, he was a crazy 17-year-old who got so violent that it took 2 big aides to hold him down. Sometimes he'd be locked on his ward for a week, and Georgina couldn't get in to see him. Then he'd simmer down and resume his visits on the floor of our room. Wade's father had 2 friends who particularly impressed Wade, Liddy and Hunt. "Those guys will do anything," Wade said. He said this often. He seemed worried about it. Georgina didn't like my pestering Wade about his father. She ignored me as I sat on the floor with him, but I couldn't resist. "Like what?" I asked him. "What kinds of things will they do?" "I can't reveal," said Wade. Shortly after he lapsed into a violent phase, then went on for several weeks. Georgina was at a loose end without Wade's visits. Because I felt partly responsible for his absence, I offered various distractions. "Let's redecorate the room," I said. "Let's play Scrabble, or let's cook things." Cooking things was what appealed to Georgina. "Let's make caramels," she said. I was surprised that 2 people in the kitchen could make caramels. I thought of them as mass production item like automobiles, for which complicated machinery was needed. But according to Georgina, all that was needed was a frying pan and sugar. "When it's caramelized," she said, "we pour it into little balls on wax paper." The nurses thought it was cute that we were cooking. "Practicing for when you and Wade get married?" one asked. "I don't think Wade is the marrying kind," said Georgina. "Even someone who's never made caramels knows how hot sugar has to be before it's caramelized." That's how hot it was when the pan slipped and I poured half the sugar onto Georgina's hand, which was holding the wax paper straight. I screamed and screamed, but Georgina didn't make a sound. The nurses ran in and produced ice and unguents and wrappings, and I kept screaming, and Georgina did nothing. She stood still with her candied hand stretched out in front of her. I can't remember if it was E. Howard Hunt or G. Gordon Liddy who said during the Watergate hearings that he nightly held his hand in a candle flame till his palm burned to assure himself he could stand up to torture. Whoever it was, we knew about it already. The bay of the pigs, the sheared skin, the bare-handed killers who'd do anything. We'd seen the previews, Wade, Georgina, and I, along with an audience of nurses whose reviews ran something like this: patient lacked effect after accident, patient continues fantasy that father is a CIA operative with dangerous friends. If you lived here, you'd be home now. Daisy was a seasonal event. She came before Thanksgiving and stayed through Christmas every year. Some years she came for her birthday in May as well. She always got a single. Would anyone like to share? The head nurse asked at our weekly hall meeting one November morning. It was a tense moment. Georgina and I, who already shared, were free to enjoy the confusion. Me. Somebody who was a Martin's girlfriend, also had a little penis of her own, which she was eager to show off, raised a hand. Nobody would wanted to share with her. I would if somebody would want to, but of course nobody would want to, so I wouldn't want to force somebody to want to. This was Cynthia, who started talking like that after 6 months of shock. Polly to the rescue. "I'll share with you, Cynthia." But that didn't solve the problem, because Polly was in a double herself. Her roommate was a new anorexic named Janet, who was scheduled for forced feedings the moment she dropped below 75. Lisa leaned towards me. "I watched her on the scale yesterday. 78, she said loudly. "She'll be on the tube by the weekend." 78 is the perfect weight, said Janet. She said the same about 83 and 79, though, so nobody wanted to share with her either. In the end of the couple, catatonics were teamed up, and Daisy's room was ready for her arrival on November 15th. Daisy had 2 passions, laxatives and chicken. Every morning, she presented herself at the nursing station and drummed her fingers, pale and stained with nicotine, on the counter, impatient for laxatives. I want my Colace," she would hiss. "I want my X-Lax." If someone was standing near her, she would jab her elbow into the person's side or step on her foot. Daisy hated anyone to be near her. Twice a week, her squat potato-faced father brought a whole chicken roasted by her mother and wrapped in aluminum foil. Daisy would hold the chicken in her lap and fondle it through the foil, darting her eyes around the room, eager for her father to leave so she could get going on with the chicken. But Daisy's father wanted to stay as long as possible because he was in love with Daisy. Lisa explained it. He can't believe he produced her. He wants to fuck her to make sure she's real. But she smells, Polly objected. She smelled, of course, like chicken and shit. She didn't always smell, said Lisa. I thought Lisa was right because I noticed that Daisy was sexy. Even though she smelled and glowered and hissed and poked, she had a spark the rest of us lacked. She wore shorts and tank tops to display her pale, weary limbs. And when she ambled down the hall in the mornings to get her laxatives, she swung her ass in insouciant half circles. The Martin's girlfriend was in love with her, too. She followed her down the hall, crooning, "Want to see my penis?" To which Daisy would hiss, "I shit on your penis." Nobody had ever been in Daisy's room. Lisa was determined to get in. She had a plan. "Man, am I constipated," she said for 3 days. Wow. On the 4th day, she got some X-Lax out of the head nurse. Didn't work, she reported the next morning. "Got anything stronger?" "How about castor oil?" said the head nurse. She was overworked. "This place is the fastest snake pit," said Lisa. "Give me a double dose of X-Lax." Now she had 6 X-Lax, and she was ready to bargain. She stood in front of Daisy's doors. "Hey, Daisy," she called. "Hey, Daisy." She kicked in the door. "Fuck off," said Daisy. "Hey, Daisy." Daisy hissed. Lisa leaned close to the door. "I got something you want," she said. "Bullshit," said Daisy. Then she opened the door. Georgina and I had been watching from down the hall. When Daisy opened the door, we craned our necks, but it was too dark in Daisy's room to see anything. When the door shut behind Lisa, a strange, sweet smell wafted briefly into the hall. Lisa didn't come out for a long time. We gave up waiting and went over to the cafeteria for lunch. Lisa gave her report during the evening news. She stood in front of the TV and spoke loud enough to drown out the Walter Cronkite. "Daisy's room is full of chicken," she said. "She eats chicken in there. She has a special method she showed me. She peels all the meat off because she likes to keep the carcasses whole, even the wings. She peels the meat off them, then she puts the carcasses on the floor next to the last carcass. She has about 9 now. She says that she got 14 in it's time to leave." "Did she give you any chicken?" I asked. I didn't want any of her disgusting chicken. Why does she do it?" Georgina asked. "Hey man," said Lisa, "I don't know everything." "What about the laxatives?" Polly wanted to know. Needs them because of all the chicken." "There's more to this than meets the eye," said Georgina. "Listen, I got access," said Lisa. The discussion generated quickly after that. Within the week, there was more news about Daisy. Her father had brought her an apartment for Christmas. A love nest, Lisa called it. Daisy was pleased with herself and spent more time out of her room, hoping that someone would ask her about the apartment. Georgina obligated. "How big is the apartment, Daisy?" "1 bedroom, L-shaped living room, eat-in chicken." "You mean eat-in kitchen?" "That's what I said, asshole." "Where's the apartment, Daisy?" "Near the Mass General." "On the way to the airport, like?" "Near the Mass General." Daisy didn't want to admit it was on the way to the airport. "What do you like best about it?" Daisy shut her eyes and paused, relishing her favorite part, the sign. "What does the sign say?" "If you lived there, you'd be home now." She clenched her hands with excitement. See, every day people would drive past and read the sign and think, yeah, if I lived here, I'd be home now. And I will be home, motherfuckers. Daisy left early that year to spend Christmas in her apartment. "She'll be back," said Lisa. But Lisa for once was wrong. One afternoon in May, we were all called to a special hall meeting. "Girls," said the head nurse, "I have some sad news." We all leaned forward. "Daisy committed suicide yesterday." "Was she in her apartment?" asked Regina. "Did she shoot herself?" asked Polly. "Who's Daisy? Do I know Daisy?" asked the Martin's girlfriend. "Did she leave a note?" I asked. "The details aren't important," said the head nurse. "It was her birthday, wasn't it?" asked Lisa. The head nurse nodded. We all observed a moment of silence for Daisy. My suicide. Suicide is a form of murder, premeditated murder. It isn't something you do the first time you think of doing it. It takes getting used to, and you need the means, the opportunity, the motive. A successful suicide demands good organization and a cool head, both are which incompatible with the suicide state of mind. It's important to cultivate detachment. One way to do this is to practice imagining yourself dead, or in the process of dying. If there's a window, you might imagine your body falling out the window. If there's a knife, you must imagine the knife piercing your skin. If there's a train coming, you must imagine your torso flattened under its wheels. These exercises are necessary to achieving the proper distance. The motive is paramount. Without a strong motive, you're sunk. My motives were weak. An American history paper I didn't want to write, and the question I asked months earlier, why not kill myself? Dead. I wouldn't have to write the paper, nor would I have to keep debating the question. The debate was wearing me out. Once you've posed that question, it won't go away. I think many people kill themselves simply to stop the debate about whether they will or what they won't. Anything I thought or did was immediately drawn into the debate. Made a stupid remark? Why not kill myself? Missed the bus? Better put an end to it all. Even the good got in there. I liked the movie. Maybe I shouldn't kill myself. Actually, it was only part of myself I wanted to kill. The part that wanted to kill herself. That dragged me into the suicide debate and made every window, kitchen, implement, and subway station a rehearsal for tragedy. I didn't figure this out, though, until after I swallowed the 50 aspirin. I had a boyfriend named Johnny who wrote me love poems. Good ones. I called him up and said I was going to kill myself, left the phone off the hook, took my 50 aspirin, and realized it was a mistake. Then I went out to get some milk, which my mother had asked me to do before I took the aspirin. Johnny called the police. They went to my house and told my mother what I had done. She turned up in the A&P on Mass Ave, just as I was about to pass out over the meat counter. As I walked the 5 blocks to the A&P, I was gripped by humiliation and regret. I've made the mistake and I was going to die because of it. Perhaps I deserved to die because of it. I began to cry about my death. For a moment, I felt compassion for myself and all the unhappiness I contained. Then things started to blur and whiz. By the time I reached the store, the world had been reduced to a narrow, throbbing tunnel. I lost my peripheral vision, my ears were ringing, my pulse was pounding. The bloody chops and steaks staining against their plastic wrappings were the last thing I saw clearly. Having my stomach pumped brought me around. They took a long tube and put it slowly up my nose and went down the back of my throat. It was like being choked to death. Then they began to pump. That was like having blood drawn on a massive scale. The suction, the sense of tissue collapsing and touching itself in a way it shouldn't, the nausea as all that was inside was pulled out. It was a good deterrent. Next time I decided I certainly wouldn't take the aspirin. But when they were done, I wondered if there would be a next time. I felt good. I wasn't dead, yet something was dead. Perhaps I managed my particular objective of partial suicide. I was lighter, airier than I'd been in years. My airiness lasted for months. I did some of my homework, I stopped seeing Johnny, and took up with my English teacher, who wrote even better poems, though not to me. I went to New York with him. He took me to the Frick to see the Vermeers. The only odd thing was suddenly I was vegetarian. I associated meat with suicide because of passing out at the meat counter, but I knew there was more to it. The meat was bruised, bleeding, and imprisoned in a tight wrapping, and though I had a 6-month respite from thinking about it, so was I. Elementary topography. Perhaps it's still unclear how I ended up in there. It must have been something more than a pimple. I didn't mention that I'd never seen that doctor before, that he decided to put me away after only 15 minutes, 20 maybe. What about me was so deranged that in less than a half an hour, a doctor would pack me off to the nut house? He tricked me, though. A couple of weeks, it was closer to 2 years. I was 18. I signed myself in. I had to, because I was of age. It was that or a court order, though they could have never gotten a court order against me. I didn't know that, so I signed myself in. I wasn't a danger to society. Was I a danger to myself? The 50 aspirin, but I've explained them. They were metaphorical. I wanted to get rid of a certain aspect of my character. I was performing a kind of self-abortion with those aspirin. It worked for a while, then it stopped, but I had no heart to try again. Take it from his point of view. It was 1967. Even in lives like this, professional lives lived out in the suburbs behind the shrubbery. There was a strange undertow, a tug from the other world, the drifting, drugged out, no last name youth universe that knocked people off balance. One could call it threatening to use this language. What are those kids doing? And then one of them walks into his office wearing a skirt the size of a napkin, with a molted chin and speaking in monosyllables, doped up he figures. He looks again at the name jotted on the notepad in front of him. Didn't he meet her parents at a party 2 years ago? Harvard faculty, or was it MIT? Her boots were worn down, but her coat's a good one. It's a mean world out there, as Lisa would say. He can't get in good conscience send her back into it to become flotsam on the sub-social tide that washes up now and then in his office, depositing others like her, a form of preventive medicine. Am I being too kind to him? A few years ago, I read he'd been accused of sexual harassment by a former patient, but that's been happening a lot these days. It's become a fashion able to accuse doctors. Maybe it was too early in the morning for him as well as for me, and he couldn't think of what else to do. Maybe most likely he was covering his ass. My point of view is harder to explain. First I went to his office, then I got into the taxi, then I walked up to the stone steps to the administration building of McLean Hospital, and if I remember correctly, sat in a chair for 15 minutes waiting to sign my freedom away. Several preconditions were necessary if you were going to do such a thing. I was having a problem with patterns. Oriental rugs, tiles, floors, printed curtains, things like that. Supermarkets were especially bad because of the long hypnotic. Supermarkets were especially bad because of the long hypnotic checkerboard aisles. When I looked at these things, I saw other things within them. That sounds as though I was hallucinating, and I wasn't. I knew I was looking at the floor or a curtain, but all patterns seemed to contain a potential representations which in a dizzying array would flicker briefly to life. That could be a forest, a flock of birds, a second-grade class picture. Well, it wasn't. It was a rug, or whatever it was, but my glimpses of the other things it might be were exhausting. Reality was getting too dense. Something was happening to my perceptions of people. When I looked at someone's face, I often did not maintain an unbroken connection to the concept of a face. Once you start parsing a face, it's a peculiar item. Squishy, pointy, with lots of air vents and wet spots. This was the reverse of my problem with patterns. Instead of seeing too much meaning, I didn't see any meaning. But I wasn't simply going nuts, tumbling down a shaft into Wonderland. It was my misfortune or salvation to be at all times perfectly conscious of my misperceptions of reality. I never believed anything I saw or thought I saw. Not only that, I correctly understood each new weird activity. Now I say to myself, you are feeling alienated from people, and unlike other people, therefore you are projecting your discomfort onto them. When you look at a face, you see a blob of rubber because you are worried that your face is a blob of rubber. This clarity made me able to behave normally, which posed some interesting questions. Was everybody seeing this stuff and acting as though they weren't? Was insanity just a matter of dropping the act? If some people didn't see these things, that was the matter with them, they were blind or something, these questions had me unsettled. Something had been peeled back, a covering or a shell that works to protect us. I couldn't decide whether the covering was something on me or something attached to everything in the world. Didn't matter really whether it had been, it wasn't there anymore. And this was the main precondition that anything might be something else. Once I'd accept that, it followed that I might be mad or that someone might think me mad. How could I say for certain that I wasn't if I couldn't say for certain that a curtain wasn't a mountain range? I have to admit, though, that I knew I wasn't mad. It was a different precondition that tipped the balance, the state of contrariety. My ambition was to negate. The world, whether dense or hollow, provoked only my negations. When I was supposed to be awake, I was asleep. When I was supposed to speak, I was silent. When a pleasure offered itself to me, I avoided it. My hunger, my thirst, my loneliness, and boredom and fear were all weapons aimed at my enemy, the world. They didn't matter. A wit to the world. Of course, they tormented me, but I was gruesome satisfaction from my sufferings. They proved my existence. All my integrity seemed to lie in saying no. So the opportunity to be incarcerated was too good to resist. It was a very big no, the biggest no this side of suicide. Perverse reasoning, but back of the perversity, I knew I wasn't mad and that they wouldn't keep me there locked up in a loony bin. Abstract from voluntary application. Patient withdrew to her room, ate very little, did not work or study, and complimented jumping into the river. She signed this voluntary application, fully realizing the nature of her act. Applied topography. 2 locked doors with a 5-foot space between them where you had to stand while the nurse relocked the first door and unlocked the second. Just inside, 3 phone booths, then a couple of single rooms and the living room and an eat-in kitchen. This arrangement ensured a good first impression for visitors. Once you turned the corner, past the living room though, things changed. A long, long hallway, too long, 7 or 8 double rooms on one side, the nursing station centered on the other, flanked by the conference room and hydrotherapy tub room. Lunatics to the left, staff to the right. The toilets and showers rooms were also to the right, as though the staff claimed oversight of most private acts. A blackboard with our 20-odd names in green chalk and spaces after each were "We" in white chalk, entered our destination, departure time, and the time of return whenever we left the ward. The blackboard hung directly across from the nursing station. When someone was restricted to the ward, the head nurse wrote "restricted" in green chalk beside the name. We got advance warning of an admission when a new name appeared on the list, sometimes as much as a day before the person of that name appeared on the hall. The discharge and the dead stayed on the list for a while in silent memoriam. At the end of the terrible hall, terrible TV room, we liked it. At least we preferred it to the living room. It was messy, noisy, smoky, and most important, it was on the left, Luniac side of things. As far as we were concerned, the living room belonged to the staff. We were agitated to move our weekly hall meeting from the living room to the TV room. It never happened. After the TV room, another turn in the hall. 2 more singles, 1 double, a toilet, and seclusion. The seclusion room was the size of an average suburban bathroom. Its only window was a chicken wire enforced one in the door that allowed people to look in and see what you were up to. You couldn't get up too much in there. The only thing in it was a bare mattress on the green linoleum floor. The walls were chipped as though someone had been at them with fingernails or teeth. The seclusion room was supposed to be soundproof. It wasn't. You could pop into the seclusion room, shut the door, and yell for a while. When you were done, you could open the door and leave. Yelling in the TV room or the hall room was acting out. It was not a good idea, but yelling in the seclusion room was fine. You could always request to be locked in the seclusion room. Not many people made that request. You had to request to get out too. A nurse would look through the chicken wire and decide if you're ready to come out. Somewhat like looking at the cake through the glass of an oven door. The seclusion room etiquette was, if you weren't locked in, anybody could join you. A nurse could interrupt your yelling to try to find out why you were yelling, or some other crazy person could come in and start yelling too, hence the request business. Freedom was the price of privacy. The real purpose of the seclusion room, though, was to quarantine people who'd gone bananas. As a group, we maintained a certain level of noisiness and misery. Anyone who sustained a high level for more than a few hours was put in seclusion. Otherwise, the staff reasoned we would all turn up the volume on our nuttiness and the staff would lose control. There were no objective criteria for deciding to put someone into seclusion. It was a relative, like the grading curve in high school. Seclusion worked. After a day or night in there with nothing to do, most people calmed down. If they didn't, they went to maximum security. Our double-locked doors, our still mesh window screens, our kitchen stocked with plastic knives and locked unless a nurse was with us, or bathroom doors that didn't lock. All this was a medium security. Maximum security was another world. The prelude to ice cream. The hospital was on the hills outside of town, the way hospitals are in movies about the insane. Our hospital was famous and had housed many great poets and singers. Did the hospital specialize in poets and singers, or was it poets and singers specialized in madness? Ray Charles was the most famous exhibition. We all hoped he'd return and serenade us from the window of the drug rehabilitation ward. He never did. We had the Taylor family, though. James graduated to a different hospital before I arrived, but Kate and Livingstone were there. In Ray Charles' absence, their North Carolina twins Blue made us sad enough. When you're sad, you need to hear your sorrows structured into a sound. Robert Lau also didn't come while I was there. Sylvia Plath had come and gone. What is it about meter and cadence and rhythm that makes their makers mad? The grounds were large and beautifully planted. They were pristine as well, which we were almost never allowed to walk around. But now and then, for a special treat, we were taken through them on the way to get ice cream. The group had an atomic structure, a nucleus of nuts surrounded by darting, nervous nurse electrons charged with our protection, or with protecting the residents of Belmont from us. The residents were well-heeled. Most worked as engineers or technocrats along the technology highway Route 128. The important other type of Belmont residents was the John Bricker. The John Brick Society lay as far to the east of Belmont as the hospital lay to the west. We saw the two institutions as variations on each other. Doubtless the Birchers did not see it this way. But between us we had Belmont surrounded. The engineers knew this, and they took care not to stare when we came into the ice cream parlor. Saying that we traveled with a group of nurses does not fully explain the situation. A complex system of privileges determined how many nurses accompanied each patient, and whether a patient could leave the grounds in the first place. The privileges started at no privileges, restricted to the ward. This was often Lisa's condition. Sometimes she was bumped up to the next rung, 2 to 1s. That meant she could leave the ward if she had 2 nurses with her, though only to go to the cafeteria or occupational therapy. Even with our high staff to patient ratio, 2 to 1s often meant restricted to the ward. 2 nurses could rarely be spared to take Lisa by the elbows and hustle her over to dinner. Then there were 1s to 1. A nurse and a patient bond together like Siamese twins. Some patients were on 1 to 1s, even on the ward, which was like having a page or valet, or like having a bad conscience. It developed on the nurse. A lousy nurse on 1 to 1s could be a problem. It was usually a long-term assignment, so the nurse could get to understand her patient. The gradations were by the time. 1 to 2s, 1 nurse, 2 patients, led to group, 3 or 4 patients and 1 nurse. If you behaved in the group, you got something called destination privileges. This meant telephoning the head nurse the moment you arrived at wherever you were going to let her know you were there. You had to call before coming back too, so she could calculate the time and distance in case you ran away instead. Then there was mutual escort, which was 2 relatively not crazy patients going places together, and the top grounds, which meant you could go all over the hospital alone. Once the stations of the cross were achieved within this hospital, the whole circuit began again in the outside world. Someone who had mutual escorts or grounds could probably still be on a group outside. So we went to Bailey's in Waverly Square with our routine of nurses. The arrangement of atoms in our molecule were more complex than it appeared to the engineer while he was sipping coffee at the counter and graciously pretending not to look at us. Lisa would have been with us. Lisa never made it past 1 to 1 after her 3rd escape. Polly was on 1 to 1s, but that was to make her feel safe, not hemmed in, and she always came along. Georgina and I were on group, but since nobody else was on group, we were effectively on 1 to 2s. Cynthia and the Martins' girlfriend were on 1 to 2s. This made it seem that Georgina and I were as crazy as Cynthia and the Martins' girlfriend. We weren't, and there was a bit of resentment on our part. Daisy was at the top of the chart, full of talents and grounds. Nobody could understand why. 6 patients, 3 nurses. It was a 10 or 15-minute walk down the hill past the rose bushes and stately trees of our beautiful hospital. The further we got from our ward, the jumpier the nurses became. By the time we hit the street, they were silent and closed in on us. They assumed the nonchalant look and expression that said, "I'm not a nurse escorting 6 luniacs to the ice cream bowler." But they were. and we were the 6th lunatics, so we behaved like lunatics. None of us did anything unusual. We kept doing whatever we did back on the ward, muttering, snarling, crying. Daisy poked people. Georgina complained about not being as crazy as the other two. Stop acting out, a nurse would say. They were above pinching us or giving a Daisy-like poke to try shutting us up. Nurse nips. We didn't blame them for trying, and they didn't blame us for being ourselves. It was all we had, the truth, and the nurses knew it.